Welcome to the Low Carb USA podcast, where we seek to inspire you to help us build this community. I'm Doug Reynolds.
And this is Pam Devine.
Okay, I can hear. Hey, Adam, how you doing?
Good, and you?
All right, man. It's good to finally meet you, even if it's virtually, man.
Yeah. Are you a Safa?
I am.
Oh, gosh. Okay, good. Well, I can say lekker. Nice to meet you too.
Exactly, and I'll understand, yeah. So, Adam Pike, you're one of the lawyers that was involved in the Prof. Tim Noakes trial. And
Yeah.
I remember listening to one of the talks that you did. I think it was in the ethics course from the Nutrition Network. And you mentioned that you're not even involved in that sort of law at all. I think you're contract law or something. But because you were with the Noakes Foundation at the time that this all blew up, you kind of got involved in the trial. Maybe you can tell us, let's start there. Tell us a little bit about how that all came about.
It was the craziest thing. I just left a very big kind of corporate law firm. I was working in the mergers and acquisitions practice group, and I decided I didn't need to see the word partner underneath my name on a business card. So I kind of struck out on my own. And, you know, when you start your own business, you just take any work that comes your way. What had happened is I'd gone up to Johannesburg for some conference, and I'd bumped into a friend of mine, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but he just looked different. And I said, like, Pete, are you okay? You're just looking out of sorts. His jacket was all crumpled. And he said, no, I've started banting. I was like, what? He said, no, come on, I'll talk to you all about it. Come for supper. So off we went and had a couple of steaks. I ordered a nice fat beer. I said, hey, why don't you know? He was like, nope. Anyway, he started telling me about this thing. He said, just do yourself a favor, listen to YouTube, Tim Noakes, just listen to it. Flip, I didn't sleep that night. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is something extraordinary. Anyway, I started banting, and it was so effective, or, you know, low carbing, going on to keto for your audience. Mm-hmm. My wife thought I had an eating disorder and booked me into an eating disorder clinic for a consultation. I was like, listen, you know, I'm eating as much food as humanly possible. I'm never hungry. It's great. Anyway, she wasn't very happy about it, but she subsequently eats a lot of steak, bacon, and she's just started eating lamb, which is result.
Cool.
But anyway, what happened was I was sitting in in our local shopping center, and I saw Tim walk past, and I thought, okay, this is it. I just went up to him and I said, listen, I'm doing your thing, your banting thing, and I'm a corporate lawyer, and I see that you've set up a foundation, and I'll do whatever you want. I'll do it. I will do anything you need, and I'll do it for free. So, you know, I also mentioned that I'd studied drama with his daughter, and I'd been at the same school as his son. Anyway, a couple of months later, I got a call from Travis, his son, and he said, listen, you know, come on over. We need you to do some work for us. Awesome. And he said, oh, by the way, you don't have to do it for free. I was like, okay, great. So then what happened was Tim mentioned, he said, there's this blooming complaint, but, you know, nothing will come of it. It's so ridiculous. It's, you know, don't worry about it. But I just thought I'd let you know. Anyway, as we know, the complaint didn't go away, and it turned into this thing. I'm not a health lawyer. At the time, I wasn't a dispute resolution lawyer or tribunal lawyer or defense attorney or anything like that. But, you know, the way I approach the practice is to adopt a granular approach. And I kind of read in and studied the whole thing. I studied everything. I mean, I did everything I could do to get my head around the rules, all the regulations, the procedures and whatnot. And that's kind of how I ended up working with Tim.
Yeah, it turned into a massive fiasco. So I wanted to kind of touch on two different aspects here that you kind of brought up, both of them in your talk. One is the concept of ethical behavior on social media, especially for doctors and practitioners. And And then maybe a bit later, we can go into the concept of them being protected now, based especially on Tim's trial and Gary Fettke's trial and stuff like that, and the precedent that might have set. But I remember you talking in the beginning about the fact that the Tim's trial all started because of some tweet that he made. And you went on to explain how that wasn't unethical or unlawful or whatever to say. And yet, Claire Stratham and all of that, afterwards, their behavior was actually unethical online in the follow-up to that. So maybe if you could just explain how that, that kind of timeline, and maybe give a couple of gems about how people can make sure that they behave ethically, and to me it's just behave like a proper human being, and yeah. Pretty much that does it, but maybe some more legal definitions.
Yeah, so someone asked Tim a question. It was as simple as that, and being the polite chap that Tim is, he answered it. Importantly, the question was asked in the abstract. Is it safe for, is it safe for breastfeeding mums to eat,
LCHF, I think.
Yeah, LCHF, yeah.
Okay.
And Tim went, well, of course it's safe. Key is to wean baby onto, LCHF. Now, that was an abstract question and an abstract answer. It wasn't, hi, I'm a pregnant mother. I'm going to be having a baby. Is it safe for me to eat LCHF? I'm worried about winds and gas. Tim didn't answer and say, I'm now prescribing to you and your baby what you should do. So that was the first, issue that we had to deal with. It was an abstract question. Tim didn't even know he was speaking to a mother-to-be. This was just a question. And the answer was similarly abstract. It wasn't a me question, it was a we question.
Right.
Okay. And that distinction was made very clearly at the beginning of the trial. So what then happened is the dietitian interposed herself into this conversation and stomped her feet and said, this is unacceptable. How can you give this kind of dangerous advice online? And I'm going to report you to, the HPCSA, and don't listen to him. The dietitian says, I've got much better advice and I'm going to give you that advice. And just listen to me. I'm a mother and I know all about this, and whatever you do, I'm the authority on this question. So what that did is all of a sudden, the dietitian interposes herself and she starts offering advice. Tim didn't give advice. He merely gave information. Mm-hmm. So that there was this kind of moral asymmetry. Tim giving information, on the one hand, that's seen as terrible and dangerous. But on the other hand, for the nutritionist to give actual advice and to say, call me, I will give you advice. On the other hand, rather hypocritically, there was no problem for the HPCSAs from their point of view. And so again, that was pointed out.
Right, and so those are clear, and those others never got charged.
No, and I think it helped our case tremendously because we kept going, well, when are you going to be charging Ms. Stratham for giving advice? Because if it was Noakes that gave advice, well, Claire Stratham gave the opposite advice. It's still advice. Mm. One opinion doesn't discount the other opinion. Either they both gave information or they both gave advice. So you've got to decide. But the fact that you're prosecuting one person and not the other, well, that calls into question your bona fides. And that was, a rather kind of pointed prong or one of the pointed prongs of our defense. Yeah.
Yeah, and then there was, I think another point you brought up was about there is a law about not bringing a colleague into disrepute or something. And,
that was very funny. At the beginning of her evidence, she set herself up as an expert of sorts. In our law, before you can introduce opinion or expert evidence, you've got to qualify yourself as an expert. In other words, you've got to demonstrate to the tribunal or the court that you are indeed an expert and you have the expertise to give opinion evidence. But procedurally, they failed to do that. So any evidence that she gave was actually discounted. But the irony was that she took the tribunal through the ethical handbook. And she pointed out what she alleged to be all of Tim's ethical failings. So Mike van der Nest, who was our lead advocate, senior counsel, said, look, I'd just like you to go to rule, I can't remember the rule of hand, so I'll just make it up. I'd like you to go to rule 12 and just please read that out to the tribunal. And so as she starts reading, she's like, no medical practitioner will bring another practitioner into disrepute. And you could just see her neck kind of tighten and her shoulders. And so Mike says, listen, I just want to take you back through the tweets that you tweeted. Now, how many followers have you got? Oh, you've got 3,000 tweets here. And Tim's got how many? Oh, he's got 100,000, right? So 100,000, at least 103,000 people are listening to this conversation, yes? Yes. I'll just read your first tweet. This is appalling. How could you give so terrible advice like this? This is unethical. I'm going to report you to the HPCSA in big capital letters. So Mike says, do you think that tweet brought Professor Noakes into disrepute? You could just see her, she shrank by at least, a factor of, I don't want to be too nasty. So that was the one interesting kind of exchange. And then there was the other. Part of her case was that now this was Tim's patient. So Mike says, well, hang on. Okay, let's take it to rule, and I'm going to make it up again, 23. No medical practitioner will supersede another medical practitioner's patient. What that means is if the patient is under a doctor's care, you can't interpose yourself and start treating the patient. So Mike goes, well, if your case is that the lady was Tim's patient, you phoned her up and gave her medical advice, which means that, let's just read rule 23 again, you will not supersede the doctor's patient, which it seems you've just done this. At which point Claire burst into tears and we had to take a 5-minute break because she realized, unfortunately, that with her enthusiasm, she had failed to check herself and what she had done. And I can sympathize, she really did, and honestly, on the best interpretation, believe that she was doing something right. And I give her that. And that's fine. If she honestly believed that, then that's perfectly fine. But you've got to be very careful when you impugn someone's integrity, a professional career, and their goodwill. And before you do that, you've got to be very, very careful about making sure that you haven't broken the same rules. So that was, it really put her evidence in a very dark place. And, unfortunately, her evidence didn't go down very well with the tribunal,
right?
Obviously, because they lost.
So, especially on your social media, some of the places can be quite bad. Facebook's not that bad, but Twitter especially is becoming incredibly hostile. And I don't know why people feel like they impervious or invisible or whatever because they're behind their computer or something. And so they say a lot of things that they wouldn't actually say if they were face to face. And I think just as a kind of a warning to doctors and that if they are on Facebook and they get involved in these conversations, like I said earlier, I think that I'd like to get, sort of a more legal opinion from you, but basically my take on it is just behave like a ethical, upstanding human being, and you're not going to run into trouble.
Absolutely.
So,
you're right. Just because you're doing this, you've got to accept that there's someone else who you're talking to is also doing this. And if you just drop it, you would never say to someone, oh, you're a blooming idiot, and you stupid, and your ideas are rubbish, and go to hell.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you look at the political discourse as well and how polarized that's become, I'm almost certain that this is a significant driver of that divide. So unless you're just on Twitter for fun and shit posting, and just being, sarcastic, kind of ironic dude, that's fine. But make it clear. But if you're trying to engage in honest discourse, well, then you have to be honest about it, and you've got to be careful about what you say. And a couple of the most powerful words on Twitter can be, oh, I think you're right, and I'm sorry.
Right. Let me think about that or something.
Yeah, like, okay. Oh, I didn't think about that. Yeah. Shucks. Okay, well, I'll go off and let me see if I can make my argument stronger or accept that your argument's better. And I don't see people doing that because, everyone wants, to own someone or, thump someone rather than...
They want to have the last word sort of thing. Yeah. And in terms of giving advice for doctors and practitioners and that, I mean, it goes back to the original thing with Tim. It's like, you can state an opinion about something, and you can talk generically about people or someone should do this, but just don't engage in a personal interaction about that particular person in terms of giving information or advice, and that way you kind of stay out of that dangerous area.
Well, I guess there are two questions. There are two issues there. Obviously, if your client, if your patient approaches you on Twitter in public, they must know that they're asking you a very loud question in the public square. And I suppose it would be up to the doctor to say, listen, Rob, come and visit me at 9:15 on Tuesday morning, and we can have a conversation about this. That's what any doctor would do if a patient walked in, on his conversation while he's having supper with his wife and children and said, oh, doctor, I've got this terrible sore here. What do I do about it? It's like, I don't want to see your rash here. Please come to the surgery. So that's, just common sense. And I don't think any doctor would get confused about that. Maybe they would. The other thing is, if it's just a generic question on Twitter, I don't think, reasonably speaking, that question and answer session could ever be construed as a doctor-patient relationship. Obviously, the doctor would have to be extremely careful about how he or she goes about responding, because of course you can't diagnose over Twitter.
Exactly.
You can't take a history over Twitter, and I reckon that there's a whole bunch of steps that need to be followed before you constitute that doctor-patient relationship. And I don't think it's possible to do that over Twitter, notwithstanding what Professor Pinar tried to argue as an expert for.
And I think that's the thing, is as much as we don't believe that someone doesn't want to end up going through 3 years of hell, or 4 years of hell, like Tim did, in order to prove that what they said was okay or right. So I would say just be a little careful and don't end up there in the first place. Like, don't be the first test case for this.
Or the third, or the fourth, actually. There's that doctor in Sweden, I think. I can't remember her name. But, the other thing is facts always win. So if you're giving factual information, it's very difficult for someone to say, oh, you're not allowed to say that. As I think was Ravin Rocky argued, just because a book is in the library, it doesn't mean to say that the author of the book is giving advice. The book's in the library. You ask Tim a question. It's just like going to a library and asking for information, and the information is then shared.
Right.
You're publishing information on a micro blogging account. That's all it is. It's information. And if it's wrong, well, then it's in the public. And then there's an opportunity for people who disagree to state why it's wrong, without an ad hominem attack.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So, you mentioned Gary Fetke, and then also that Swedish lady that I can't remember the name of at the moment either. Shame. I'm so sorry, whoever you are, I'm really sorry. But it was something else that you talked about later in that talk I referred to that you made, where we're talking now about whether or not a doctor's protected in terms of prescribing this as an intervention for their patients. There's more and more people. We actually literally have established a nonprofit right now called the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners, which we're scrambling to get launched by the 1st of November. With the idea that the clinical guidelines that we wrote, that Tim was actually on the board of advisors for that, it's going to have a real home there, and it's going to hopefully provide an environment for all these metabolic practitioners to be and have conversations and have opinions, because the lady, Dr. Del Hite, who actually was instrumental in actually authoring that whole document, she was involved in a medical malpractice lawsuit. And the judge read out to them what standard of care was. And it says it explicitly is not what they learned in college or what they learned from some professional organization, or not even in a set of clinical guidelines, but in what a number of doctors in a particular environment with the same sort of training, what they all agree or what they all do in practice. And so in order for that, the keto low carb community has been very scattered. So we're kind of hoping that that under this umbrella now, they will slowly, as it grows, have more and more protection against this.
Sure.
But you did talk about the fact that just de facto, if you're doing, I don't think you mentioned enough, if there's good science behind the decision that you made, even if it goes against the current standard of care, that they still are protected. I'd like to maybe, if you could elaborate on that a little bit more.
Sure. So yeah, I don't know that the dietary guidelines is a treatment protocol. I don't know that it is elevated to that status.
Well, okay, just to go back, there's two things here. There's the dietary guidelines, which is, and I think South Africa has their own as well, but all based, I think, on the US dietary guidelines. But the clinical guidelines is a document that we wrote with we'd established a whole board of advisors, including Tim and Gary. And this is advice to clinicians to utilize carbohydrate restriction as a therapeutic intervention. And that's different to the dietary guidelines. And that's why we're hoping that the conversations around that will eventually establish an alternative standard of care for people that don't eat carbs, because our metabolisms are different. So, that needs to be recognized.
Yeah, absolutely.
But what I was interested in is what you talked about, where, if a doctor does something that goes against any standard of care, but the decision to do that was based on a bunch of research and some evidence that he based this decision on, that he would possibly be able to defend himself against that if it ever came to it. Did I understand what you said there correctly?
Yeah, and I think there are two components to that. First of all, the doctor, I think the way that medicine is practiced now has changed somewhat. In the olden days, you'd go and sit outside dutifully, and doctor would call you in, smoking his pipe, and he would tell you what to do, and you would, defer to his authority, and he would give you the pills, and off you'd go, and you'd take them without really questioning why, how, the basis of his treatment. But I think nowadays, patients and people who are seeking clinical advice are far more emboldened to say, listen, what are you doing and why are you doing it? What are the side effects? What? So it becomes more of a collaborative engagement rather than a unidirectional directional engagement. And that's the important bit. In our law, no harm can be done to he who consents. So the important thing for the doctor to do is to explain to the patient, this is how I'm proposing to treat your metabolic condition. This is why I've made this decision or making this proposal. I'm happy to hand over all of the research into this. I'm giving you an opportunity to go away and satisfy yourself that between the two of us, we agree that this is a treatment that you'd like to accept. And in that way, you fulfilled an important pillar of medical ethics, which is patient autonomy. You've got to give the patient as much information as that patient needs to accept the treatment. The doctor never imposes a treatment. The patient accepts a treatment. And so really it becomes a question of, I consent to the treatment that you're going to do. And because I make informed, fully informed consent, an injury can never be done to me because I've accepted it. So that's really what it is. I think in the past, doctors or practitioners were concerned that if they should give advice, make a diagnosis and then prescribe a low-carb dietary intervention, that they would be attacked because there is no evidence, because the evidence just wasn't there, or it was there, but it was never apparent. In the last 10 years, people don't go, what are you keto? Are you, what is that? Everyone knows exactly what the thing is. And I think that's what Gary's trial and what Tim's trial has really done. It's really exploded this way of eating into the public imagination. And so, it's up to the patient to exercise that autonomy and to understand what he or she wants. Look, also, no one's going to go to a keto doctor and expect, 3 pieces of fruit in the morning, black coffee, and a bowl of porridge. You're not going to expect that. So you go to a particular kind of doctor for a particular kind of treatment. Right. But I think autonomy and collaboration and full disclosure is the way that a doctor can, I don't know, I wouldn't want to say protect himself, but fulfill his ethical obligations in relation to autonomy.
I think that's incredibly powerful thing. I hope I know as many, I hope a ton of doctors listen to this, because I think so many of them, there's tons of them that have their heads in the sand and they still refuse to believe it. But there's still a lot that kind of get it. And like, Dr. Brian Lenskes is one example where he was actually doing it himself and seeing these great benefits, but never had the confidence to take it to his patients as in an intervention or something, because it wasn't standard of care. Standard of care said, you have to eat all these carbs and take insulin if you've got diabetes and all that kind of rubbish. And then he came to one of our events and listened to all these, fantastic speakers from around the world really talking about it and saying, hey, like, this is for real, this, And he literally, that Monday, he went back to his office and he didn't force it on his patients, but before, when his patients were asking him, how come you're looking so much better, so much thinner and so much healthier, he would say, oh, it's just a diet I'm doing, But now he was saying, okay, he's prepared to explain exactly what he was doing. And like you said, like, explain exactly what it's about, give people links and all that sort of stuff, to go and research it themselves and say, okay, yeah, I'm gonna try this as well. And then he was happy to help them to do it. And he'd had just phenomenal results. He phoned me at the end of the year. The event was in July, end of July. He phoned me at the end of the year, and we hadn't even spoken at the event. I didn't even know him up until that point. But he said to me, Doug, in all my 20 years of practice, I've never, ever had a patient come off insulin. But in the last 5 months, I've had 11 patients come off insulin. And he says, I didn't take them off insulin. They took themselves off insulin. I just advised them how they might change their lifestyle and what they eat. And
But
that was in
isn't
5
it-
months. He's gone on
But
now.
it's incredible.
Yes. It's how can you ignore that? How can you, I think it's unethical for doctors, once they're exposed to that information, if they refuse to acknowledge it and at least offer it as an option to their patients, they are being unethical.
Look, that's a very good point. Absolutely, because you've got to. I mean, I think an element of the ethical obligation of autonomy, ensuring that your patient is able to make that decision autonomously, is to put all the different options in front of the patient. So we're either going to cut the tumor out of your leg, we can amputate the leg, or we're going to do nothing. This is what happens if we cut the tumor out. This is what happens if we amputate. This is what happens if we do nothing. And you give full disclosure of all the different kinds of treatments that are available. So we can either give you 5 pieces of fruit in the morning, a cup of black coffee, and a bowl of oats, okay? Or you don't have breakfast. Sure, you'll be hungry for the first week when you wake up, but you'll get used to it. And then all of a sudden, you find that you actually feel quite invigorated. And when you break your fast at 11 o'clock or 2 o'clock, man, you are going to feel super cool. And you'll see the pounds drop off, and you're going to feel lighter, and you're going to see your ribs again. It's going to be awesome. Mm-hmm. Or keep eating the fruit, keep getting dental caries, keep having gas, and stay fat. It's your choice.
Yeah, and not just fat, but stay sick. Sure. I mean, there's some, replace fat with sick. There's just so, that's the thing. And every day I'm learning about other conditions and that just eating properly either alleviates or eradicates completely. It's just.
Look, I don't know the research on this, but, and I'm not a doctor, and I don't profess to know any much more than any lay person, but if you eat properly and you eat the way that you were designed to eat, the diseases that are attracted to people who eat in ways other than the original way of eating, you'll avoid them. You don't know. I mean, you don't know what's in the stuff. I mean, nowadays you pick up a chocolate bar, a candy bar, and it's like a chemical composition. It's no longer milk, chocolate, sugar. It's sodium this and benzoate that and and you're like, good God, this is product. This is not a produce, And I mean, the way I teach my kids to eat, I say, are you going to eat produce or are you going to eat a product? And there's a distinction. Produce is something that comes out of the ground or gets chopped off the side of a car. That's produce. A product is something that pops out of a machine and is covered in more than 2 layers of plastic with bright colors, because that's what you do. You have to sell and market products. You don't have to market and sell produce, because produce, we know intrinsically that produce is what's good for us. Yeah. And so, empower your patients to make good decisions.
Yeah, so I think that's a really cool place to leave this. It's been a fascinating conversation. I think it's going to be very, very powerful and useful to a lot of doctors who are concerned about, first of all, what they might be able to say on social media, and secondly, how they can practice, because I know a lot of them are aching to and are scared to. Hopefully now they'll have a bit of courage to be able to go and actually help a bunch of patients that they were never able to help before. One of the funniest things is Dr. Brian Lenskes that I was talking about. He's local here in San Diego, and we have local San Diego keto meetings at one stage, or we were before COVID. And the one time afterwards, he was standing in the corner with a bunch of people around him, and he was jabbering like crazy about stuff and his wife was standing there next to us, and she said, "Who is that guy, and what have you done with my husband?" She said he used to be this mild, neat little guy that used to go, he hated public things, and he would just go and sit in the corner and be quiet on his own or whatever. And now he's got his life back. He's just so passionate now because he's helping people. That's why he became a doctor, and it's so inspiring to see how inspired he is. And, sure. Hopefully this will help more doctors to be able to do this without being scared. So thank you so much for agreeing.
With the work that you're doing and the work that Tim's done and the work that Gary's done, you guys have just created this huge umbrella under which all of the adventurous doctors can take cover from, attacks from the outside.
Right.
And you guys are creating a platform for doctors to change the health of the world.
Agreed.
And that's awesome.
And that's, yeah, I mean,
Excellent.
that's
Keep
what gets me up in the morning, and hopefully, hopefully it's becomes not only the adventurous doctors, because I often tease guys like Brian and Tim, and that's like, you guys should have been engineers, because most doctors, and give them credit, they've just stuffed all this stuff in their brain, and they don't even have time sometimes to question it. But it's the doctors that are looking at things and saying, but I'm miserable and none of my patients are getting better. Why? And trying to understand it, and then having the courage to change it. Hopefully, as time goes by, that's the whole point of starting this organization, is that eventually it'll be a place for any doctors to come, and not just the adventurous ones. So
I look forward to watching it grow.
Yeah, awesome. And I'm sure that you and I are going to have a lot to do with each other in the future. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Doug, it's an absolute pleasure and good luck.
Okay, thanks.
Good stuff. Cool.
You've been listening to an episode of the Low Carb USA podcast. You can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/lowcarbusa.